Legends, what's up? It's Darkmech here with a Blood Death Knight guide for the War Within. Now in today's video, we're going to cover off your talent setups, which talents to pick, but more importantly, which talents to avoid and why. We're going to talk about the hero talents that are available, which one is the best. We're going to discuss the play styles behind each of those hero talents. We're going to talk about some general rotation priorities for you to keep in mind. We're going to look at the Season 1 tier set. We're going to talk about your consumables, and we're going to finish up with trinkets. So let's get into it. But just before I start, I want to give a huge shout out as always to Mandel, who has helped with the information being provided in this video, and the newcomer Reholy, Lord of the Beacon Casts, who has also helped out to ensure you're getting the right info. So starting off with talents. Now I want to take a bit of a different approach in speaking about the talents in this guide, instead of running through every single ability, putting them on the screen, putting the talents on the screen, talking about the rhyme and the reason behind them. I'm actually just going to tell you what to pick. What I do want to focus on though is what talents not to pick and why. Now, like all things in life, strange things happen, and Blood DK guides are no different, because I've gone and watched some and I've seen the talent recommendations being made, and then much like Limp Bizkit, I had to come back to save music. It was almost like fucking a doorknob became an Olympic sport, and a bunch of these content creators couldn't wait to go out and represent their country. But before we get into that, let's start off with the talents that you do want to take. And these will be in a pinned comment on the video. I'm going to show them from a Deathbringer hero perspective, but I will cover Sandland when we get to that as well. So don't worry, you're still being looked after. Now from a Mythic Plus perspective, your talent setup is going to look like this. From a raid perspective, your talents are going to look like this. As you can see, there's actually not a lot of change here. Regarding Mythic Plus to raid, the only difference is actually taking place on the class side of the tree, where we're swapping March of Darkness and Blinding Sleet out. There are some other changes you can make as well, but for the sake of ease, these are the two easiest choices to make in keeping a really strong default build in both forms of content that can handle everything. The blood tree itself remains the same for both when you're playing Deathbringer. There is also an option for mass grip if you want to take this build and the encounter calls for it, and it would look like this. Now the mass grip build has you moving a point from hemostasis, which honestly is a significant talent regarding its value, so it's not something that I would personally say is worthwhile doing unless the situation really called for this talent choice. You also do need to be aware that with big fat juicy grips comes the chance of syncing up a bunch of melee swings, which comes with an added bonus of the release spirit button. Okay, so that's your talents set and forget. Let's move on to the part I really wanted to cover in this video, and that is the talents you should not choose and why, and we're gonna start off with Rune Tap. Now this is a really popular choice amongst a lot of players that simply aren't willing to map out any kind of cooldown plan for the content they are facing. Now at the bleeding edge of Mythic Plus and raiding, only accessible by the very top, you could find a niche case for Rune Tap, and even then it might be a little bit of a stretch still. As you're here watching a YouTube guide on how to play Blood DK, the chances are this doesn't really apply to you. There is generally always something else that could be pressed instead of Rune Tap, unless the attack in question is so frequent, at which point maybe you'd have to take a step back, evaluate the situation, and see if Rune Tap was actually required for this. Now you got to remember that pressing Rune Tap is a rune that could have been allocated to Heartstrike. The big thing that comes with Heartstrike is the talent Heartbreaker. Now Heartbreaker causes your Heartstrike to generate 2 additional runic power per target hit. You pair this up with Cleaving Strikes, and it means that Heartstrike is hitting up to 3 additional enemies whilst you're standing inside your Death and Decay. To add to this, Heartbreaker during Dancing Rune Weapon means that you're 1 Heartstrike away from a Death Strike in AoE, and Mythic Plus is obviously full of AoE situations. Even outside of Dancing Rune Weapon, in AoE, you can generally have enough fuel for a Death Strike every 3 GCDs in AoE due to leftover runic power from other spells, which just gets wasted if you're pressing Rune Tap and thinking that you are winning. Number 2 on our hit list of talents not to pick is Umbilicus Eternus. Now you might read the tooltip for this and you might think about all the abilities that amplify Blood Plague damage. And then you might think Vampiric Blood is a really accessible cooldown and I can reduce the cooldown on this via talents. And then you might think to yourself, fuck, this talent could be the missing link to me surviving in Mythic Plus or in raids. However, the talent only appears good because it just squeezes all other forms of healing during its uptime. Now, what do I mean by that? There are 3 significant issues with Umbilicus Aeternus. Number 1 is that it cannibalizes all sources of healing to make itself look better. Number 2 is that it abruptly ends. So you're taking 100% no damage 1 second, and then the next second you're taking 100% damage taken. You cannot prepare for it. If you Death Strike before Umbilicus Aeternus ends, the Blood Shield just gets eaten first, as Blood Shield takes priority over Umbilicus Aeternus. And if you press another cooldown during Umbilicus Aeternus, you're just wasting its value on both. Number 3, and last up, is due to the whole no Death Striking during your Umbilicus Aeternus because you'll just waste the Blood Shield value, people naturally start deciding not to Death Strike during it and then drop Coagulopathy, which is a crushing loss of defensive throughput, seeing how strong Blood Plague is in AoE situations. And last up on our list is Foul Bulwark. So each charge of Bone Shield increases your max health by 1%. It's the EHP argument, effective hit or effective health points. It's been going on since the beginning of time. If I had more stamina, perhaps I would have lived. Now, Foul Bulwark suffers a fate similar to Rune Tap. It's completely unnecessary and it's only taken if you need it to fit within a specific cooldown plan. If you have nothing else to spare, if anything, it would actually be considered after Rune Tap, as Rune Tap is easier to path through, and the point that you would actually take to pick Foul Bulwark up would likely come from Hemostasis, which is an incredibly high valued talent. To people recommending that you take Foul Bulwark, ask them why they don't stack stamina gems. It's basically the same idea. If you pretend that the max HP increase will somehow matter, you do so without considering what you lose out on. And in the case of Foul Bulwark, it raises the Will of the Necropolis threshold by 10%. So unless you are literally actually using Foul Bulwark's effective health points all the time, you're actually reducing the defensive value. So that's it. They're the big 3 that I wanted to cover. And now, if you're ever watching some content creators stream or someone with really high IO points, and they tell you to take any 3 of those talents, you can tell them, stop being such a dumb cunt. Moving on to hero talents now, and which one is the best? So Blood Death Knight has the choice between Deathbringer and Senlayan. Now, if you are not pushing content, if you don't care about what is the best, play whatever you like. Play what suits your goal. That's sweet. If you are pushing content though, if you do care about the numbers, if you don't want to gimp yourself or your group, then you're going to want to play Deathbringer. It's pretty much that simple at the moment. Deathbringer has just been designed way too well. It's got impactful gameplay choices. It's got fantastic integration between the hero talents and the Death Knight kit, both offensively and defensively. You get things like the lower cooldown on Lichborn, permanent damage reduction via rune carved plates, and you get this reduced Mararang cost, which is just huge for our gameplay loop. The choices at the moment in the actual Deathbringer hero talent tree itself are pretty much locked in decisions. There isn't a lot of competition between the other node choices at the moment, and even with the upcoming changes posted in 11.0.5, there's probably only going to be one flex node with Reaper of Souls and Grim Reaper. The rest will just remain locked choices, so there's not a lot of variation there, but we'll see what happens as we continue to get deeper into the war within. So you've chosen your hero talent side, now let's talk about how you play it. We're going to start off with Sandland. So your Sandland hero talent trees will look like this. This is your raid option here on the screen right now. And then this is your Mythic Plus one. Now I'm aware that the Mythic Plus build has Rune Tap in it, especially after me just going on a rant about all the reasons you don't take Rune Tap. However, due to the way Sandland functions, we want to get all the improved Vampiric Blood talents, and due to the pathing options on the tree, there actually isn't much of a choice, so we end up running through Rune Tap to get to the bottom of the tree. So Sandland revolves all around the use of Vampiric Blood and wanting to press it as often as possible. Playing Sandland means that you no longer see Vampiric Blood as a defensive cooldown, but more of an ability that you need to get off cooldown as quickly as possible so you can hit it again to pump damage. You actually get penalized if you start holding your Vampiric Blood for other situations, so it is a real change to get comfortable with and to adapt to in this playstyle. The first talent on the tree is Vampiric Strike, and this replaces your Heart Strike either when you get a proc of Essence of the Blood Queen or when Vampiric Blood is active. You can proc a Vampiric Strike after a Death Strike as well, but the proc chance is relatively low, so the chance is you'll be seeing your Vampiric Strikes during your Vampiric Blood windows. Now, Vampiric Strike heals you for 1% of your max HP and grants you a stack of Essence of the Blood Queen. These stacks last for 20 seconds and refresh on application. Each stack grants you 1% haste, capping at 5 stacks or 5% haste, which can be further increased to 7 stacks or 7% haste through the talents. And thanks to the bottom capstone talent, Gift of the Sandland, your Essence of the Blood Queen effects are increased by 150% during Vampiric Blood. So how do you go about playing it? There's actually 3 stages to master if you want to be a Sandland Vampire Pumper. There's pre-Vampiric Blood, during Vampiric Blood, and post-Vampiric Blood. So pre-Vampiric Blood, what you're going to do is you're going to refresh your Bone Shield stacks or your charges, because the last thing that you want to do is spend 2 runes on a Marrow Rend during your Vampiric Blood window. You're going to Death Strike just prior to pressing Vampiric Blood, as this will ensure that you have the Coagulopathy buff as it feeds into Blood Plague damage. You're going to Blood Boil, so all the targets you're facing are affected by Blood Plague. Then you're going to drop your Death and Decay for cleaving strikes, the extra haste, the damage, and the healing. Then you'll hit Vampiric Blood and go to town spamming Vampiric Strike. Now, during your Vampiric Blood, you still want to press Death Strike to avoid lengthy times at Runic Cap, or when you require healing. You also need to maintain the Coagulopathy buff by pressing your Death Strike once every 8 seconds, so don't avoid this. You're going to press Vampiric Strike and you're going to be spending pretty much all your runes on this, as it will refresh your Blood Plague, it'll build stacks of Essence of the Blood Queen, and this is where a lot of your pump's going to come from. When your Vampiric Blood hits 6 seconds remaining, you're going to use Consumption, as this will cause your Blood Plague damage to tick faster. Remember that Consumption causes your Blood Plague damage to occur 30% faster for 6 seconds, hence pressing it in the final 6 seconds of your Vampiric Blood. This will feed further into your Infliction of Sorrow damage, and this will also net you back 2 runes. Now, you want to ensure that your last global cooldown in Vampiric Blood is a Vampiric Strike to refresh your buff and your stacks carrying forward. Then you're in your post-Vampiric Blood phase. Now, once Vampiric Blood is done, your goal is to get back to the next one as quickly as possible. To do this, you'll be using Death Strike whenever you have the runic power available, as this is going to get you back into the Vampiric Blood window as quickly as possible, and that is the Sandland gameplay loop. Now let's move on to Deathbringer. So Deathbringer talents, you're going to look like this for your raid, and this one for your Mythic Plus, which we already pretty much covered off at the start of this video. Now Deathbringer's gameplay loop revolves around the talent Reaper's Mark, and this ability impacts a single enemy with a 10-second buff, and this debuff stacks to a max of 40, and then it explodes for damage. It also debuffs remaining enemies, reducing the damage they dealt to you from a physical standpoint by 5%. Now, the way you build these 40 stacks is linked to your rotational gameplay. Good rotational gameplay sees you making 40 stacks for a big bang really easy. Poor rotational gameplay will see you fall short. The Deathbringer hero talent tree though is built to assist you in making this easy as possible, and thus strikes a really awesome balance between the hero talents and the class itself. So how do the stacks work? So your stacks are generated via shadow damage with special Shadow Frost damage netting you extra stacks. And the good news is, as I just mentioned, you just get all this via doing your normal rotation and gameplay loop. It's just the solid integration from the Deathbringer talents into your core abilities make this a really interactive hero talent to play. If an enemy dies prior to your Reaper's Mark exploding, it'll also travel to a newly engaged enemy and you can start building stacks again. So when do you send Reaper's Mark? So from a rotational aspect, you're going to want to send your Reaper's Mark just prior to hitting your Dancing Rune weapon in your setup. You also want to get the most out of your Wave of Souls. Now when you hit Reaper's Mark, Wave of Souls shoots out. It goes out in a line and it comes back. And this deals a huge portion of your damage. The cooldown for Reaper's Mark is short, it's 45 seconds. So it's not worth running around and holding it in packs for long periods of time. If you can line it up with a large pack in Mythic Plus, it's worth delaying for a few seconds. Otherwise, send it on down the line. What about my big size? Now, after you've used your Reaper's Mark and it explodes, you gain 2 banked empowered Mararens. So after your Reaper's Mark has recently detonated, you're going to want to cast one of those empowered Mararens on a target, and this will trigger a reduced cost Mararen, and it'll send a big ass rad scythe to strike a bunch of enemies around you, which is the Capstone Exterminate. This deals a massive amount of damage. It also has a chance via Painful Death, a talent in the Deathbringer hero tree, to reapply another stack of Reaper's Mark for you, which will just build the 40 stacks and go again. You have 45 seconds to use these 2 empowered Mararens, as this is the cooldown on Reaper's Mark, so don't feel like you just need to sit on these, ensure that you're using them. If you've got 15 seconds or under remaining on your Reaper's Mark cooldown, just send the second charge if you're still sitting on it. Moving into general rotation priorities, what I want to cover off here are some general rules to follow when playing your Death Knight, regardless of what hero system you're playing. Now your aim is to always have 3 runes recharging. You never want to let your Bone Shield charges drop, and you're going to use Mararen to keep these stacks up. You want to spend the majority of your runes on Heart Strike to fuel Death Strikes. You want to cycle your Blood Boil charges and not just sit on 2 charges. This ensures that all enemies that you're in combat with are always affected by Blood Plague. Death and Decay is a huge ability for Blood DKs. You're severely impacting your performance if you're not maintaining good uptime on your Death and Decay, and if you're not standing in it. Coagulopathy causes your Death Strikes and your Blood Plagues to deal more damage. It stacks up to 5, and this is important to maintain through your gameplay. Ossuary has long been a staple in the Blood DK rotation, and this is really nothing different. Ensure that you're always sitting above 5 stacks of Bone Shield. Do not back-to-back Death Strike. It's important to weave Death Strikes into your rotation, not just fill your runic bar up and then spend it all on Death Strikes. And lastly, your Dancing Rune Weapon. Blood's kit is tied to reducing the cooldown on Dancing Rune Weapon. You've got talents like Insatiable Blade, Tombstone, and Bonestorm that all feed into this. Don't sit on these talents. Now I want to give you a bit of an example about how this works, so you've got something to actually put into practice here. So an opener for you putting this into practice would be to pre-cast Death and Decay on the ground just prior to the mobs you're engaging or the boss. When you're moving in, Death's Caress just prior to the encounter starting, as it has travel time, and get Raise Dead going as it's off the GCD. If you were Deathbringer, you would cast Reaper's Mark here. Then you would cast Abomination Limb, Dancing Rune Weapon, you would Blood Boil, then you would Bonestorm. Now, if you were Sandland, this is where you would cast your Vampiric Blood. Then you would Heart Strike, Death Strike, Heart Strike, you would then Tombstone, then you would Blood Boil, Death Strike, Heart Strike, and finish up with a Consumption, and then go into your priority rotation. I was gonna cover off the priority rotations for Raid, for Mythic Plus, but I think it's just me rap golding off a bunch of abilities like I just did in the opener there, and you're not probably going to retain a lot of that. So what I've done is in the pinned comment, I have put links to the rotation priorities on Wowhead. Put that on your second screen, go and practice them on a target dummy. I think you will get a lot more out of that. So moving on to the tier set for Season 1 Blood DKs. So our 2-piece bonus is defensive value, whilst our 4-piece is offensive. The 2-piece sees whilst you have 1 charge of Bone Shield at least, you'll take 2% less damage from all sources, and losing a Bone Shield charge has a chance to grant you Unbroken, which reduces damage taken by another 1% for 6 seconds and can stack up to 3 times. The 4-piece bonus, every Bone Shield charge grants you an additional 0.5% damage done, up to 7.5%. Whilst you're below 6 Bone Shield charges, you have the chance when hit to regenerate 1 to 2 Bone Shield charges. So the initial 4-piece was 1% additional damage done, up to 12% per charge of Bone Shield. However, a change came sweeping through just prior to the start of Season 1, which saw an aura buff applied to Blood DK, increasing all damage done by 5%, and a nerf to the 4-piece tier set bonus from that 1% additional damage to 0.5% additional damage per stack. And what did all this mean? Well, as outlined by Mandel on the Icy Veins write-up, the halving in value of the Blood Death Knight 4-piece set bonus and its associated aura buff served only to fully remove any playstyle element from the set, as it's now completely passive. And this might actually suit some people. For more people that like the gameplay loops and interaction, it's pretty disappointing. Previously, you did care slightly about making sure that your Reaper's Mark detonations, your Tombstone usage, and your Bone Storm cast were all done at the full 12% additional damage bonus, as this was better than flat out just ignoring it. Now, while the aura buff that comes with it is a positive, as it lessens the dependency on balancing the damage of the 4-set bonus, the set itself is now wholly irrelevant, and it's just a 4 to 5% increase in damage at all times, which does bring it in line with other tank set bonuses, just makes it completely passive. Let's talk stats in the War Within, and have we had any changes? Now, if you are playing Sandland, your stat priority is going to be Strength as number 1, Haste as number 2, and then Mastery, Crit, and Versatility are all going to share the same line. You're going to have to sim to find out which value you're going to get from each one as you progress through different gear pieces. Deathbringer stat priority, however, Strength's going to be your number 1. You only really need to get Haste to 5% from your secondaries, and this is in order to get an extra blood boil in during your Reaper's Mark window, and to make maintaining rune carved plates pretty easily achievable. Then it's Mastery, Crit, and Versatility on the next line, and then Haste, anything above 5% goes under that. Again though, I would always encourage you to sim your character as you get new pieces of loot. Talking consumables now, the War Within brings a plethora of new enchants and new potions and things like that. Flask-wise, Flask of the Alchemical Chaos is what you're going to want to get your hands on for raid. You do have options otherwise of running the Haste Flask if you're running Sandland, the Flask of Tempered Swiftness. If you wanted to go with another option for Deathbringer as well, you do have Flask of Tempered Aggression. Combat potion-wise, Tempered Potion, Health Pot is the Algiri Healing Potion. Your weapon buff, you want to have Algiri Mana Oil. Augment runes, the new Crystallized Augment rune. Your food, Feast of the Midnight Masquerade or the Everything Stew. You're going to want to get 1 Culminating Blasphemite. And then other gem-wise, again, sim yourself, but the Versatility Ruby is a really good one, just crit and versatility. Weapon enchant-wise, we are still running Rune of the Fallen Crusader. Nothing changes there. Cloak-wise, your best option is going to be the Chant of Winged Grace. Chest, you want Crystalline Radiance. Braces, Chant of the Armored Leech. On your legs, get a Stormbound Armor Kit. Boots, Defender's March. On your ring, if you're playing Sandland, again, Haste. If you're playing Deathbringer, I would suggest Crit. Finishing up now with Trinkets for the Blood DK in the War Within, and we're going to start with the Mythic Plus options. So the first one we're going to talk about is the Arakara Sack Brood from Mythic Plus here. Now this gives you an absurd amount of primary stat on a proc. The eggs last for 1 minute on the floor, and as long as you're within 100 yards of them ignoring line of sight, you'll get value from them. The chance to proc them is hasted, and at 2.5 before that, it's already solidly twice the value of the other trinkets available. There is current tuning incoming for this trinket with a 5% primary nerf, but I still expect this trinket to remain extremely strong. The next trinket from Mythic Plus I want to talk about is the Spare Meat Hook. Now in upcoming tuning, this trinket is actually going to be impacted via the tank specialization tuning. So we're going to have to keep an eye on how far the value of this trinket actually falls, as it was one of the BIS options. This trinket works so well for us as a Blood DK because the trinket itself causes physical damage with its on use, and our talent Bloodshot causes you to deal 25% increased physical damage whilst you have Blood Shield active. Therefore, you would usually Death Strike first and then use the on use for this trinket for a free 25% extra damage. We'll have to see what the tank specialization nerf does to this trinket. The last trinket I want to talk about from Mythic Plus, with the current tuning likely to come in, is likely actually going to become one of the best trinkets available from Mythic Plus along with Arakara, and that is the Oppressive Orator's Larynx. This trinket was already extremely strong in AoE situations, and avoiding the tuning that Spare Meathook is going to be cast to, this trinket's probably going to go right up in value. It provides a solid amount of strength and big damage in AoE and single target. Moving on to your raid choices now, and there's really only one outstanding trinket coming out from the raid at the moment, and that is Sikran's Endless Arsenal. Now, each time you use this trinket, you unleash your weapon and you cycle to the next one. There's 3 in total. So the Barrage is an on-use large frontal, and you gain a passive that whilst you remain stationary, you build up a speed boost that unleashes when you move. There's Flourish, which is an on-use single target dot, and you gain a passive parry and avoidance stack. And the last one is Decimation, and this is an on-use frontal line AoE, and the passive causes your crits to deal 20% bonus damage to shields. Last up, Delves. The Silken Chain Weaver from Delves is actually a fantastic trinket for Mythic Plus from a defensive aspect. The attack speed reduction on it is actually quite disgusting. It has an extremely long duration, and it is up for every big pull. So that's it. Hopefully this guide has given you the accurate information that you need to progress with your Blood DK adventures. If you have any questions at all, hit me up in the comments below. Visit the Acarus Discord and get that reliable information. Like, comment, subscribe. I'll see you all next time.